You walk into a mall on Saturday afternoon. 3 minutes later, your body is already asking for the exit. It's not shyness. It's not being picky. It's a processing system operating beyond nominal capacity, and most people confuse the symptom with personality. Here's what happens. Your brain receives between 200 and 400 simultaneous stimuli in a crowded environment. Overlapping conversations, peripheral movements, lights, smells, unsolicited physical proximity. Each input demands processing. Your nervous system tries to filter, prioritize, discard. But when volume exceeds processing rate, you don't relax. You shut down. This isn't a choice. It's an automatic preservation response. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and executive control, is the first area to saturate. You start avoiding simple decisions. Which store to enter becomes overload. Where to sit becomes paralysis. It's not indecision. It's CPU running at 100% with no margin for new tasks. Meanwhile, the amygdala fires diffuse threat signals. You can't name the danger, but your body is already on alert. Heart rate rises. Breathing becomes shallow. Trapezius muscle locks. The entire system is saying, "Get out of here." And you ignore it because someone said, "It's important to socialize," or "You need to get out more." So you push through, and then you blame yourself for not handling what everyone else handles. The social narrative says, "You need more exposure. It's just anxiety." Everyone feels this way at first. Operational lie. The problem isn't insufficient exposure. The problem is your system is configured to process 30 inputs at a time, and you're forcing 300. When a factory receives 10x its designed load, the line stops. Motivation doesn't help. Mindset doesn't help. Ford discovered this in 1913. He couldn't scale production because he was trying to process too many stages simultaneously. The solution wasn't try harder. It was divide the process, eliminate waste, and respect each station's limit. He turned 12 hours of assembly into 93 minutes, not with effort, with design. Stop here. You don't need to overcome aversion to crowds. You need to recognize installed capacity and operate within it. Rule. Your nervous system has fixed bandwidth. Crowded environments aren't difficult. They're saturated. You're not broken. You're operating outside specification. Think of Henry Ford calibrating the assembly line. He didn't ask the worker to try harder. He measured cycle time, identified the bottleneck, and adjusted flow. You do the same with sensory input. Crowds generate saturation because 80% of stimuli are irrelevant, but your brain still spends energy filtering. This drains cognitive reserve. After 20 minutes, you no longer have capacity for decision, planning, or intentional interaction. Only reactive mode remains. Psychology calls this sensory overload. Ford would call it waste. You're spending operational energy on processing that generates no useful output. There's more. People who hate crowds generally have above-average sensory sensitivity. This isn't a defect, it's factory specification. You perceive variations others ignore. Subtle light changes, tone of voice, micro-expressions, tension in the air. This is an advantage in low-density contexts. You read the room, detect patterns, anticipate problems. But in crowded environments, this same sensitivity becomes a bottleneck. You're receiving high-resolution signal when the system was designed to process low resolution in bulk. Here's the bottleneck. You can't turn off the sensitivity, so you need to control the exposure. Load control protocol. Step 1. Map your actual limit. Time how long you can operate in a crowded environment before feeling cognitive fatigue. Could be 15 minutes. Could be 40. That's your useful cycle. Non-negotiable. Accept the data. Use objective criteria. When do you start avoiding eye contact? When does conversation become hard to follow? When do you feel the need to check your phone for no reason? These are saturation indicators. Note the time. That's your operational limit. Work 20% below it. If you last 30 minutes, plan 25-minute exits. Safety margin. Step 2, design controlled input. If you need to go to a crowded event, arrive early, fewer people, fewer simultaneous stimuli, or go during off-peak hours. If you can't control timing, reduce other variables. Headphones with ambient sound, peripheral position, not center, mapped exit route. You're not running away, you're managing flow. Position matters. Center of room, Dashur 360-degree exposure. Wall or corner, all reduced visual field, fewer lateral inputs. Whenever possible, keep your back to the wall. This isn't paranoia, it's variable control. You eliminate 50% of sensory load just by adjusting position. If the environment has loud music, use noise-canceling headphones or white noise. Sounds counterintuitive, but you're trading sonic chaos for controlled input. Your brain prefers predictable processing over random stimuli. Step 3. Allocate recovery time. After high-density exposure, your system needs to reset. 30 to 60 minutes of quiet environment, low stimulation. No screen, no music, no conversation. This isn't luxury. It's preventive maintenance. Think of machine cooling. You don't shut off a diesel engine right after heavy load. You let it idle at low RPM to equalize temperature. Your nervous system works the same way. If you go from a crowded event straight into noisy traffic, you're stacking load with no recovery window. Then the next day you wake up exhausted without understanding why. Real example, an engineer I know hates conferences, but he has to go. Solution: he arrives 15 minutes before the panel that matters, sits in the last row, quick exit, uses headphones during breaks, and leaves before the coffee break becomes a crowd. He didn't overcome anything. He designed the system to function within his capacity, and it works. Another case, a designer working in an open office. 8 hours of noise, movement, interruption. Solution: she blocked 90 minutes per day as deep work. Headphones, no meetings, position facing away from the room. And before going home, 15 minutes sitting in her car in silence. Seems trivial, but it was the difference between burnout and sustainable performance. Here's the mistake. You think you need to increase tolerance. Wrong. You need to redesign exposure. Henry Ford didn't build factories expecting machines to adapt to absurd conditions. He designed the environment for the machine's capacity. You do the same with your nervous system. Aversion to crowds isn't a character flaw. It's a signal that your sensory filter is saturated and you haven't redesigned the flow yet. Rule: your nervous system has fixed bandwidth. Work within it. The most efficient production line isn't the one that processes more, it's the one that eliminates waste. If you want to operate better in crowded environments, start by controlling load, not forcing resistance. Ford said, "Any customer can have a car painted any color he wants, as long as it's black." This wasn't limitation, it was focus. He eliminated variables that didn't add value. You do the same. Eliminate exposure that doesn't add value. Party with 200 people where you know 3? Waste. In-person meeting that could be an email? Waste. You're not avoiding, you're optimizing. If this made sense, you already know the next step. And if it didn't, you're still trying to fix the machine instead of adjusting the process.